Okay, so this is part two of the WebEx series for the tech support people. One of the things I want to do just before I begin, some of the feedback I got from yesterday's session was somebody would like to see kind of a live demonstration of the SAS Sync agent using AD kind of from end to end. So what I'm going to do just before we begin this second part of SAS Cloud, I'm just going to quickly go over to a couple of my virtual machines, and I'm going to show kind of the end-to-end, the setup, the steps, syncing some users, removing some users, etc. Okay, so what I have here is I have some virtual machines. I did have some virtual machines here. Just bear with me one moment. Another reason why I went with the recording of the WebExes rather than live. So just bear with me one second. I'm just going to reconnect to my server. I do apologize. Okay, so what I have here is I have a number of virtual machines. So because of the current sync agent delay that we have with SAS Cloud, I've chosen to build my own small environment where I don't have the restriction of only being able to sync once an hour. So I have a SAS server, I have my Active Directory, and I have my sync agent. Okay, so the first thing I want to show is, I believe I'm going to have to log back in here. The first thing I'm going to show is where I downloaded the BMC file and the settings that were associated with the BMC file. So under the communications, or under the comms tab, under authentication processing, we have a section here called the LDAP sync agent settings. And from yesterday, you'll remember that I described the differences between persist operator and use delayed sync removal. So I download this key, and what I've done is I've moved this key over to this box here where I have my LDAP sync agent. I've then added this key using the Add button. And the first thing I did is I went to Configuration and I began to configure my user source. So I clicked on Next. I defined where my Active Directory is, what port it is I'm using. In this example, I'm not using SSL, and I can define any failover host that may be required. I click on Next. The agent has found an Active Directory, or it's found a user source. So it's asking me to define what is the schema. So I choose Active Directory. I then provide the information on my schema reader account. So we only read the schema. So we need to have a user account that's able to read schema. So it doesn't have to be a domain admin. I'm just using that in this example. It can be any domain user that can read schema. So I enter my user DN, I select my base DN, and I enter the password for that service account. I'm then going to enter in my DN, so in this case, CN equals users, DC equals myco, DC equals local. And I've now completed that part of the configuration. So the next piece that I want to do is I want to define which group I'm syncing. And we can see here I'm using the SAS Software Tokens group, which is defined in my Active Directory. Again, I'm not using any custom schema. If I was using custom schema, then I can create a new schema name here, and I can use perhaps maybe some of these custom fields, or one that I see quite often is regarding the mobile phone number, maybe labeled as something else inside an Active Directory. We can see here my sync agent is going to be syncing every 20 minutes. The reason we sync it every 20 minutes is due to propagation of LDAP or Active Directory. It happens approximately every 15 minutes. Now, one of the questions that I was asked yesterday after the call was regarding having multiple LDAP sync agents. And what the best practice of multiple LDAP sync agent is what we call kind of a cold standby. So having one active and having one that's kind of off in a cold standby, ready to effectively be turned on in the event that my primary sync agent does go down. So, as I mentioned yesterday, the very first sync, when I start my agent, the very first sync that's going to happen is going to be denied by SAS. And the reason being is over here under my LDAP sync agent hosts, we can see that my sync agent host has made a connection. And this is where we seen yesterday on the PowerPoint where the permission was set to change permission. So we need to make sure that this is set to allow, okay? Otherwise, there will be no communication between the agent and SAS. So if I take a look inside my group that I'm using, I have some users that are members of that group. I'm going to add a few more users into this group. We'll add a couple from down here. We'll add these 3 users here to the group. We click OK. We can now see those users have been added to the group. If I take a look back at my sync agent has been running. I can see that I currently have 5 users that are synced with SAS. I can wait 20 minutes or I can stop the agent manually. I can then start the agent. We can see this value here will increase. We now have 8 users that have synchronized. If I refresh my transaction details, I can see I have a transaction that is being sent into the SAS Cloud. We can see here under Program Files, CryptoCard, Black Shield, LDAP Sync Log. This is the new version of the sync agent that came out on July 25th. So one of the features is it now has its own log folder rather than having the logs in this parent folder. So if I just quickly refresh this, we can take a look at this log file. If I scroll all the way down to the very bottom, we can see we now have these users that have been synchronized into the cloud, or effectively SAS in my environment. So if I take a look back over here on my SAS UI, and I go to the Assignments tab, and I click on Search, we can see that these users that I've just added have now been updated inside SAS. You can see I'm using some of the custom fields here. So here I've defined location as a custom field, so I can see which of my users are non-LDAP and which users effectively are LDAP users. So I just wanted to review that. Again, if you have any questions regarding this, please save them till the end, and I'll be more than happy to take any of those questions. So back to why we're here today. So this is SAS Cloud 1B. This is the second part of our 6-part series. This particular module is going to cover some of the communications within the SAS UI, some of the policies within the SAS UI, operators, roles, alerting, the self-enrollment policy. We're then going to talk about the logging agent, the Windows logon agent, and the IIS version 8 agent. So if you recall from yesterday, we had a network diagram where we had the sync agent with our AD and our SQL syncing into cloud. In this module, we're going to be adding some more blocks to our diagram. So we're going to be adding a Windows logon agent, a SAS agent, and the logging agent. So I know some of you or most of you have been in SAS and maybe have taken perhaps Leslie's class or maybe Henry's advanced class. So I'm not going to cover everything inside the SAS UI. I'm just going to cover a few key points. So I'm going to discuss, these are the items on the comms tab that I feel that are quite important that I'm going to discuss, and then I'm going to discuss some of these items inside the policies tab. As I mentioned, I'm also going to cover the logging agent, the Windows logon agent, or WLA for Windows 8, and the IIS 8 agent. So taking a look at the SAS UI, one of the things that I find that's very useful when I'm with customers is kind of how to navigate the SAS UI, because there are lots of modules inside these 9 tabs. So one thing that I found that was very useful is just to explain to them where some of the functionality is. So we can see in the center here we have reports. And I find reports are run by audit, by admins, by operators. Pretty much anybody that would have access to the system would benefit having access to the reports. So what I like to tell the customers is anything to the left of the reports tab, and the further you go to the left of the reports tab, are help desk tasks. So for example, things that you do on the snapshot and the assignments, these are very much help desk components. And then to the right of the reports tab, and the further you go to the right, these are more of our admin functionalities. So for example, the comms and the policy. Now taking a look at the comms, one of the first things we have is some SMS settings. So within SAS Cloud, the customers have the ability to purchase SMS credits from SafeNet and use our SMS gateway to deliver the OTPs and alerts to an SMS. They also have the ability to use their own custom SMS gateway. Now we have a large list of plugins, so I just want to quickly cover them to the best of my knowledge, which ones do what. So the first one is AQL. This is an SMS service provider that we can integrate with. We have CellTrust, again, is an SMS service provider. And Clickatel is also an SMS service provider. We have some APIs. So we have an eAPI. We have the generic API. I noticed since the recent release that we are now having multiple. So I'm assuming that these are in preparation for adding new SMS plugins. So AQL, CellTrust, and Clickatel are global SMS gateways. The next one on the list is called Molly. This one is primarily used in Holland. Molly has been purchased by a company called CM, so it is now being the name is now being updated. We have another API for SOAP. We have a specific plugin for Orange Telecommunications. The CAM SMS plugin is specific to a customer in Spain known as Santander. And then we have the TimeTech plugin, and again we have a specific service provider plugin for Vodafone. This is an example of what the Clickatel SMS plugin looks like and configured with details. So we can see in order for me to send an SMS, I need to have an account with my SMS provider. I have my account username, password to access that account with my Clickatel provider. I have my URL for Clickatel's API to send an SMS message. They also provide me with an API ID and a sender ID. Again, this information must be present here as well. Again, we can use a proxy, and we have some message options to use Flash or overwrite. Now, one of the things that I recommend when dealing with an SMS gateway provider, or sorry, a plugin provider, is basically, we're taking a URL that can be popped into a browser. We're dissecting it into effectively these settings. So one thing that I always like to check before I integrate or begin to use like the generic SMS gateway as an example, when I dissect that URL, I try to make sure from the SAS system that URL that I'm going to send to the SMS provider, that I can actually paste it into a URL, hit enter, and have something happen. And in most cases, there's a message string where you can type in, this is a test for the browser. We just want to make sure that the ports are open. We want to make sure that all the information is correct. So realistically, if I could send an SMS by copying and pasting the parameters into a browser, I should be able to then send them through the SMS plugin gateway. When we talk about SMS on the system with SAS, we have three types. We have three types of SMS settings. So we have 1 OTP per SMS, we have 5 OTP per SMS, and we have SMS based on challenge and response. Now to set these settings, over on the policy tab under our token policies, we have an entity called SMS OTP. So the OTPs per SMS, this drop-down box will give you the 1 or 5. So that means that every time I successfully authenticate, the SMS gateway will send me my next 1 code or will send me my next 5 code. If you wish to implement it using challenge and response, in other words, the user will be, in most examples, the user will be prompted for example, with a Citrix Access Gateway, we can set up split authentication. So we prompt the user for a username and domain password, and only once that information has been validated and correct, the user will be taken to a second screen, excuse me, and only then will the OTP be delivered to the handset and the user will be able to log in. Now we do have some settings with regard to challenge and response, which is our request interval and our challenge TPL. And in my environment, I have these set to 1 and 1, which means that I can only request 1 OTP per minute, and that will only be valid for 1 minute. And that will eliminate any risk on somebody potentially, hammering at my SMS gateway and, taking all of my credits and effectively perhaps denial of serving it based on me having no credits. Another setting that I'll point out here on this screen is we have the ability, rather than sending the SMS message to the SMS gateway, we have the ability to send the SMS message to the SMTP. So in other words, it's an email-based tool. We talk about the SMTP settings. On the Communications tab, we have some settings. Again, like we have for SMS, we have the ability for customers to use the SAS SMTP gateway, or they can use their own custom gateway. We also have the ability for customers to use our SMTP gateway, however, have the from address customizable. So you can see here in this slide, we're using the SafeNet SMS or SMTP gateway. However, we're actually customizing the from address. So I could put in a no reply, at mycode.com or whatever the address I wanted to be from. When I click on Customize for the SMTP details, you can see here I have the ability to enter in my from address, my SMTP server, my port, my username, my password, and also SSL. So in troubleshooting, we need to make sure that the SMTP server, supports perhaps a relay. If the SMTP server is not using the default port, we need to define which port we're using. And if the SMTP server does require some form of authentication, we need to make sure that we provide the correct SMTP user and SMTP password. Now, we have a number of SMTP messages that can be sent from the system. Now, some of these SMTP messages go to end users, some of them go to operators, and some of them are alerts on the system. So I highly recommend customers to take a look specifically at the SMS messages that go to end users to make sure that the language is clear. Because the last thing we want is for a customer to roll out, 1,000 software tokens to an email and have 1,000 support calls simply because the message was not clear enough inside the SMS message. So every user, you can see here on this example, every user would be receiving the self-enrollment message. And as a user would be promoted to an operator, they would receive, for example, the operator validation message. So it's always worthwhile just to make sure that the messages are clear and concise. So we're going to talk a little bit about the SAS logging agent. So this is an agent that we provide that allows customers or service providers to have certain information from SAS reported locally on their network. Now this agent supports 2008, Windows 7. We provide it both at 32 and 64-bit architecture. The ports that we use are 8459 outbound, 8458 inbound, and if we're using Cloud, we're using UDP port 514. So under the communications module where we are now, we have some settings regarding this logging agent. We have the ability to use the default settings, which are defined by SAS operations, or we have the ability to define the custom settings. So we have the ability to define port, primary failover host, where it's the agent to SAS, and also primary failover host and port for SAS to agent. Just like we have for the LDAP sync agents, we have the ability to allow this connection. So like I just explained for LDAP syncing, once this agent makes connections to SAS, we will need to make sure that these settings are allowed. And we can see here the details. If you use the default setting, these are the details that are defined by SAS operations. So you can add your own IP address or your own host information here. And again, I just want to reiterate that we need to make sure that the permission is allowed. So taking a look at the logging agent itself, again, we downloaded a BMC file for the logging agent. On the status tab, we have the ability to stop and start this agent. The configurations tab, we have two types of messages that can be delivered to a file or event viewer or syslog, and it's authentication and operator activity. Now when we take a look at the authentication message, we have the options of sending nothing, sending it to a file, sending it to an event viewer, or sending it to a syslog server. When we send it to a file, we have the ability to define the path, and we have the ability to define a delimiter. When we send it to the event viewer, we have the ability to define the source name. Okay? And this is what's going to show up inside the event viewer. So by default, we provide a name of SAS logging agent. Again, this is customizable by the customer. We also have the ability to send it to syslog. And in order to send to syslog, we need to define a primary and perhaps a secondary IP. We need to define the format. So currently we support ArcSight, RFC 5424, and we also need to define the severity. We also provide you the ability using syslog to define the facility as well. These are two examples of, you'll notice here we have the ability to do a test on the agent. So when I perform the test, we can see here is an example of a test message. And then when I take a look at the example, or when I take a look at the log file, you can see in this example, I'm registered with the server, and over time I would start to receive my authentication if I'm reporting to file, and my operator information as well. So we continue on the SAS Comms tab. We have our pre-authentication rules. So the pre-authentication rules are important because these are the beginning of context-based, which is coming in future releases. I put an example here of the context, of the pre-auth rule. There are a number of conditions and filters that can be set and defined. One of the most common is to perhaps restrict access to certain servers using pre-auth. So I could build a set of pre-auth rules that will allow my users in groups to only access, for example, a fixed firewall versus a Cisco ASA or a Juniper device. The pre-auth rules are quite important. They are very complex. On the website, under the support section, under downloads, you will find a best practices guide. And this document describes everything that you need to know about pre-auth rules. You have the ability to download the BSID key file. So like we have for Radius, we have the shared secret that does encryption between the client, Radius client, and the system. All of our agents also have these key files. Okay? Now, by default, every system has a default key file. It's best practice for customers to create a new key file and download it, and inside each of our agents in the install path, we have the ability to define where that BSID key file is located. And if you see here in this example, it's very similar. So all agents you will see regarding, depending on what agent it is, you will see you have a key file. So it's important when you're hardening or when a customer is going through a hardening process of making sure the system is working, that we do recommend that they don't use the default key file. Again, some agents will not work if you use the default key file. I've found, for example, certain IIS agents will need to have a key file. The Windows logon agent especially will need to have a unique key file. Under the Comms tab, we have some settings for migration. So we have some settings here for migrating from SafeWord to SAS, from Crypto Server version 5 to SAS, and from Crypto Server version 6 to SAS. Now, on the sessions that we're doing on Thursday, we will be covering migrations from SafeWord, from CryptoShield, even from Black Shield. We will be reviewing the migration process. Now, under comms, we also have the ability to add our auth nodes. We did cover auth nodes yesterday, so I just want to point out under auth nodes, when we edit a specific auth node, you'll notice that we have the ability to define sharing and realms. And this is used a lot for service providers that wish to share an authentication node across multiple customers. So we have the ability here to share the node, we have the ability to do account lookup based on username, and we have the ability to enable realms. We quickly move over to the Policies tab. I just want to review a few items that I feel are important on the Policies tab. Now, one of them is, of course, the lockout and unlock policy. Again, most customers would change these settings to what it is they have within their Microsoft group policy. So if the group policy says after 10 failed attempts, they lock you up for 15 minutes, I highly advise customers to kind of match those settings. You can do alerting as well, send out an alert email. Now, one thing I just want to point out here when we talk about locks, in SAS, I find personally there are 3 types of locks. Okay, so our enrollment has a lock. So you'll see in a few moments, when I review the self-enrollment policy, you will see we have a value for the number of times you can fail the enrollment before you get locked out. Okay, so that's one type of lock to be aware of. That's your enrollment lockout. We also have our account lockout, which are these settings here that you're seeing. So in this environment, again, if I try to log in 10 times consecutively, the system's going to lock me out for 15 minutes. Now, the third type of lock that we have are based on tokens. If we take an example of a software token that has a client-side pin, so you're entering the pin into the client, we have the potential for that client-side pin to be locked based on the token template. So if I try to brute force the pin by guessing it, after so many times, the token itself will lock. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of your enrollment locking, your account locking, and potentially your token locking. Taking a look at the token templates, I've picked out two. There are token templates for every type of token. Now, when you provision a token in SAS, it gets provisioned based on the token template. So before customers provision any tokens for enrollment, I would highly recommend that they take a look at these settings. Because again, what we don't want to have happen is a customer rolls out 500 tokens and finds out that maybe the display on the token is base 64 and they would perhaps rather have decimal because of ease of use rather than security. So I picked out eToken. On eToken, we have the ability to define our PIN policy. So if I was importing some type of hardware token through a DAT file or a BTK file, again, before I would import that token, I would need to define what my token template is. I've also provided an example here for Mobile Pass. And like I mentioned before, we have here a setting for the number of times that you can try to brute force that PIN before that token will lock. Again, we have tokens that can support a client-side PIN and tokens that can support a server-side PIN. Again, the difference is based on formula. So a server-side PIN, the formula is the one-time password is equal to the PIN plus the passcode. So the user, if my PIN is 1234 and my passcode is 12345678, again, my OTP would be 1234, 12345678. We also have the ability for client-side PIN, and this is predominantly used in software-based tokens, where we're turning on the application for perhaps on a smartphone. It's prompting me for a PIN, so I enter that client-side PIN into my app, and the app would generate an OTP. So the formula for a client-side PIN is the one-time password is equal to the passcode. Now, because we have the ability to adjust token templates, we can have them all with client-side or all with server-side. Again, it is flexible. When we talk about server-side, we have a server-side PIN policy. So you'll notice in the token template, when we click on server-side, we have no settings that can be modified because we have a setting here for the server-side PIN policy. So changing on first use, using random pins, we have the ability to have the pin prepended or appended, and then we have the ability to define our length and strength and change frequency on our pin policy. Again, one of the things that comes up quite frequently, specifically with help desk, is tokens going out of sync. So we provide both time-based and event-based tokens. Each time-based and event-based tokens have their own synchronization window. So you have the ability here to define the event windows. Inner and outer are based on events, and the inner and outer time windows are based on minutes. So again, making sure that you apply these appropriately, or the customers have these set, could potentially mean that you have lots of users going out of sync versus very minimal number of users going out of sync based on these settings. On the Policies tab, we have some third-party options. We have the ability to define a radius token. Now, the radius token is used a lot for customers that are migrating from an existing technology to SAS. So we have the ability to set up a proxy, for example, an NPS proxy, or we have the ability to use radius token. Again, when we're using radius token, we are importing or allocating radius tokens down into the subscriber or the service provider account. Every radius token has a radius server home address or IP address. So this is where I can define for my radius token, what is the IP address of the radius server for my radius tokens, primary, secondary, what port I'm using, and of course the radius shared secret that's being used. And we give you the ability to do test here as well, just to validate that those settings are correct. The second type of third-party option we have is for our grid-based token. So we can define whether or not we allow trivial patterns, and then we can define what characters are within the grid, and then we can define the minimum length of my grid. Sorry, of my pattern, my personal identification pattern. We talk about role management. Again, within role management, this allows us to define what the users can actually see within the SAS UI. So you have to understand that there are users who can authenticate through SAS. They can be promoted to an operator within a subscriber, which allows them to see one subscriber account. An operator can then be promoted to an account manager within the virtual server, okay, as a service provider, and that will allow them to see multiple subscriber accounts. And like I mentioned yesterday, when we onboard an account, we have a section for groups, and we can define groups of account managers so that I can only see specific, or sorry, I can only manage or see specific subscriber accounts. So in an environment where customers would like to have account managers only managing specific customers, we do have the ability to do that based on groups and based on account manager role and scope. So let's take a look quickly at how we can create a specific role. And in this environment, I'm also going to show you, in this video, I'm also going to show you how we can use the operator provisioning tasks. So under policy, under role management, we have the ability to define our roles by clicking role management. The default role will give us access to all tabs, all modules. So what I want to do is only give access to certain tabs, which is my role. So I provide a role name and I provide a description and I click on next. So we can see here on the left-hand side, these are all the tabs. So the snapshot, the assignments, the tokens, the groups, and then on the right-hand side, we have the module that is going to be displayed and the tasks that we can do. So access, edit, delete, add, import, export, etc. So we can see here I'm building a very simple operator role. I'm only going to select a few items for my operators to see, and I click on save, and we can now see that I've created a new operator role. When I promote a user to an operator, I will have the ability to define that specific operator role, which what they can see, and scope is what they can manage. So I now also have the ability, under automation, I have the ability to set up some role provisioning rules. So what I want to do is I want to be able to use the automation within SAS to promote a user automatically to a specific operator role based on group membership. So I can define here a basic role. I can define what containers, which is my scope, what my role is, and then you can see I have my scope, which is my CSV import, and I have my group, which is my CSV users. So we can see very basic, I've created a role, and I've also defined a role provisioning task. So now when I add a user to a group, I can have these rules being triggered. So on the policy tab, we also have the ability to define some alerting. The first thing we need to do is define our thresholds. So these are based on capacity, credits, allocation, deallocation, and stop dates. Where we have thresholds, we also have alert recipients. So we have the ability to define who's going to receive, whether it's an email or an SMS, who's going to receive which types of alerts. And you can see here there's a number of alerts. When I have customers using the LDAP sync agent, I highly recommend that they enable the LDAP sync notification. We also have the ability to define management IP range for management to the SAS UI. We also have a provisioning rule. So we spoke about provisioning rules in the video for roles. We also have the ability to define provisioning rules for tokens and also for SAML. So if we take a look back at the LDAP syncing agent, I have the ability to create a provisioning rule based on that group that was added. So effectively, I could provision automatically a user with a token based on them being added to that group. So again, all of my token management is done within AD by adding and removing users to a group. So when I add a user to the group, not only do I update the user record information into SAS, but the sync agent also provisions that user with a token based on a specific rule. And we can see here I've created a new rule called auto assign an MP token. I've chosen that the type of token is a multi-platform token. I want to automatically revoke that token if it gets removed from the group. And we can see here I can define which groups are being used for that provisioning task. Again, we have provisioning rules for tokens, for operator roles, and also for SAML. This is our self-enrollment policy, so we have our self-enrollment URL. Each user that goes through enrollment, inside the actual URL, you will see that we have a unique activation code. Again, by default, this is a numeric code. Each user has one of these. It is unique per user. We can see that our reservation TTL is 10 days, and our lockout is 3 attempts. So by having these values at 10 and 3, simply means that I have 10 days to enroll my token. And if I try to enroll my token, like I mentioned earlier on lockouts, if I try to enroll it and I don't successfully do it after 3 times, my enrollment will be locked out. So those are the pieces that I'm going to cover on the SAS UI. Now we do have, inside the SAS package, we do have some additional help desk websites that I like to provide these or point these out to customers. So just so you can see an example of what these look like, they are pre-built and ready to go. So if I click, for example, on the second line, we can see here it's a website all ready to go. If you haven't seen this or haven't reviewed this, I highly recommend that you take a look at these settings, at these websites, because there's lots of information in here about user management, token management, operator management, auth nodes, right down to troubleshooting. Okay, so we start getting into things like authentication failures. So before, when I was describing the token policy, where we have our OTP equals PIN plus passcode, if we start taking a look at why some of these have been failing, we can see, for example, the user's got the passcode incorrect. The user's got the PIN incorrect. The user's got the PIN and the passcode incorrect. The users obviously failed many times consecutively, so we've locked out their account. We can see that this particular user has multiple tokens assigned, and we are unable to authenticate them with any of their tokens. We can have a pre-auth rule, and a user can be denied based on a pre-auth rule. Tokens can be suspended, revoked, so if a token is currently suspended and the user tries to authenticate, we will receive a message that it is suspended. And if a user tries to log in with an invalid username, we will see that there is an invalid user account. I just wanted to point these out to you. They're very helpful, and customers that I deal with, instead of them reinventing the wheel, it's great for them to get a base help desk. So when you take a look at those messages, here's some definitions exactly of what those messages are. So there's a first line and a second line, and as I mentioned yesterday, there's also a set for onboarding. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the Windows Logon Agent. The Windows Logon Agent supports 2008, SP2, 2008, terminal servers, Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2012 R2. It does require .NET. It does support Microsoft domains and workgroups. We provide 32 and 64-bit binaries of architecture for installation. These communicate because they're agents on port 80 or 443. With cloud, it's always 443. We have some tokens that are supported, some tokens that are not supported, and we have the ability to also enable what's known as offline or disconnected authentication. And again, there's certain tokens that will work in those environments. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just take you on a quick demonstration of the Windows Logon agent on Windows 8.1. So again, I have this SAS environment. Okay, 1 second. It just seems every time I go back to the server, it seems to be hanging. I do apologize. Again, another reason why I chose videos rather than live. Okay, so if we take a look here, I've got my SAS system. Over here, I actually have a Windows Logon agent. So what you'll see is over on my LDAP sync, one of the users that I actually was syncing was Billy, and he's authenticating into my SAS. I've then installed my Windows Logon agent on this Windows 8 box. And we can see here when I press a Control-Alt-Delete, it brings up, slowly but surely, it brings up a credential tile for me to begin my login process. You can see that this credential tile is brandable. I have the ability to customize this tile. So I go ahead and I click on the tile. I type in my username. In this case, I've got a token on my phone, so I go ahead and I generate my one-time passcode with my PIN. I click Enter. In this case, I'm also using the ability to log in with my Microsoft credentials. Now, this can be cached, so that it can be just a token and get you in, or I can have it so that every time I log in, I need to have a token, plus I need to have a Windows password. And effectively, there we go. I've now logged in to this particular desktop. Now, just to show you some of the settings that we have with regarding the Windows Logon agent, as a non-administrative user, if I launch the Logon agent configuration, you will see here it's only going to give me access to one tab. And from here, I'm able to replenish my offline authentications. I'm also able to perform a test. And if I generate my code again, okay, I can do a test right here from this client. Now, as an administrative user, if I launch this as an admin, you'll see that I have some additional settings. So you can see, as a non-admin user, I have access to offline only, but as an administrative user, I have access to all of these tabs. So I have these captured as slides in the PowerPoint, but while I'm here, I might as well just explain them to you live instead of doing through PowerPoint. So we also have policy. So this is where I can enable or disable my agent. I can use an emergency password. I can exempt local or domain administrators from using OTP. If I wanted to make it so that I didn't get prompted for my Windows password, I could enable password caching. I can enable grid tokens, and I can allow outgoing RDP connections without RDP. I have the ability to define what I can show as far as my credential, and I have the ability to define specific types of exceptions. On the communications, again, I have the ability to define my primary and secondary SAS server, my timeouts, my retry. This is where my BSID key file would be set or copied to, downloaded and copied to this folder. And again, I have the ability to test the communication as well. Like I mentioned, I can customize the appearance. I can define my logging levels. I can define where my log files are located, and I can also define my localization. So if I just pop back over to the presentation, again, we've gone through these tabs, so I'm not going to go through them again. The key thing here when we're using SAS Cloud is that you have the right agent URLs. Again, agent 1, agent 2, and again, these only they will only communicate using 443, so SSL needs to be configured. Again, we can customize appearance, logging, and localization. Of course, if you're having trouble with the logon agent, the Windows logon agent, I would highly advise you to take a look at the local file, the log file that's within the logon agent. This will provide you, especially with support, with some valuable information. The Windows logon agent does require that you have at least .NET 2.05 or above. So in this environment where I'm running Windows 8, it did require me to have .NET 3.5. If you don't have it, it will prompt you to install it. If I provide the logon agent with the wrong one-time password, I will receive an error message. Wrong SafeNet credentials. Please try the next OTP or contact your administrator. If I provide the wrong domain password, it will tell me that I am unable to authenticate with the supplied Windows credentials. So we're now going to move on from the Windows logon agent to the IIS agents. Now this is an IIS agent that's been specifically designed for TS Web and RD Web. But you can also use this for any other websites where authentication is configured to use Microsoft Authentication. So this agent supports port 80 or 443. Again, like all agents for the cloud, they use SSL on 443. We support Windows Server 8, including R2, Small Business Server 2008, Windows Server 12, and Windows Server 12 R2. We support 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5 IIS. We support RD Web, TS Web, and virtual directories and applications. We support different browsers. And again, we support additional, we have some additional web browser requirements such as cookies, JavaScript, ActiveX if you're using a software token for detection. So we take a look again, all of our agents are very similar. They have some policies, some authentication, some exceptions, some comms. So we'll take a look quickly through some of these tabs that we have. So under policies, this is where I can define what are my protected applications. I can also define that my agent is enabled or not. With the IIS agents, we have the ability to define two different authentication methods. One is the standard authentication mode, and one is split. So in a standard authentication mode, for example, if I take a look, perhaps maybe if I'm protecting some type of maybe mail, like OWA, again, I have the ability to enter a username and domain password, which is normal. When I turn on one of these agents, I would then be prompted for username, domain, password, and OTP, which is my standard mode. Okay, and again, we can support the different templates for the users based on tokens. And then we also support split, which is effectively a two-stage. So I first provide my Microsoft credentials, and then the second stage, I'm providing my SafeNet credentials. Under exceptions, we have the ability to set up some exceptions based on IP address, based on group exceptions, based on access exceptions, based on based on group. We have the ability, like all of our agents, to define the communication. So again, agent 1, agent 2 is the URLs. We only support SSL with the cloud. We have our key file, again, which is important because it's the encryption between the agent and SAS. Again, we give you the ability here to do some tests, so you can test the authentication between the agent and SAS, and we can also check the server status of SAS as well. We have our logging levels, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 being debug. We also have, again, with most of our agents, we also have some registry settings that can be set, which will provide you with additional logging levels. Okay. The logging location, so again, all of our agents can define the location where our log files will be set. And of course, we have some localization where we can customize some of the messages within the agent. That completes the second section. And what I'll do is I'll open up to any of the questions. So first of all, I've got a question here. Somebody asked, can we have the link for the website? So yes, inside these PPTs, I have links to the videos locally, the videos online, and also the websites. And at the end of each session, I provide these to, I guess I provide them to Holger, I provide them to Mo, and I also provide them to Phil. So if you want to get a copy of the videos, the presentation, and the recording of the WebEx, please reach out to Mo, Phil, or Holger, and they will provide them to you.
Hey, yeah, I ping them out automatically and you send them to me, so the guys have got them as well already.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Wow, 2 days, two presentations, no questions.
Roy, this is Aman from India, and I wanted to know an example of sharing realms, like some example where we can apply the sharing realms feature of SAS.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, so a couple of weeks ago, I was doing some training at British Telecom, and they have a Juniper device that they wanted to share across multiple subscriber companies. So as you know, you can't add the same IP address in a service provider account and in the subscriber account. You will receive an error that their IP has already been registered. Okay? So in order for me to have the same auth node being used by a parent account and a child account or multiple child accounts, that's where I would use the sharing and realming. So effectively what I would need to do is register the auth node at the parent level and then edit that auth node,
Okay.
define the sharing and realms, and define which organizations or which subscriber companies I wish to use that or share that auth node. Now, when we talk about realms, again, this is based on your user ID and your user ID lookup. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question, or are you looking for more?
I got a bit of that, but can you just show it on the console itself, like by typing in some user ID and the email address, that changes the difference?
What I can do, just bear with me 1 second.